Welcome to SPAARKK 2020, an online platform for curated performances, events, training, and discourses on arts and ideas by Artistry Center for Movement Arts, Bangalore, with the support of now-owned grant from Helvetia, the Swiss Arts Council, New Delhi. I'm Jayachandran Palaji, and I'm very happy to welcome you all wherever you are joining from across the globe. SPAARKK 2020 is a creative platform for sparking of new ideas and initiatives facilitating an increased online presence and reach of dance and allied art forms with multiplying effects, aimed to spark off new thoughts, practices and ventures in the arts. SPAARKK 2020 welcomes ideas, projects that are nascent or fully developed, invested in transdisciplinary art practices, cross-pollination of ideas, collaborations, co-productions and training, as well as encouraging network-based distribution strategies. SPAARKK 2020 is open to art practitioners of diverse disciplines. Hybrid in nature, the SPAARKK 2020 events are filmed, edited and streamed online in real time as they happen, live at Artistry's Rangamandala Theatre, which are often linked with people and events across the globe. Enabled by Artistry Culture Port, which is supported by the Goethe Institute, Max Muller-Pavan, Bangalore, some of the event contents are pre-produced and streamed through Artistry, as well as our partners' Facebook page, YouTube channels, and other platforms. Most of the events have a live interactive session with the online audience and participants as well. The events range from performances, discussions, discourses, talks, master classes, workshops, research presentations on dance, theatre, music and allied discipline with a wider reach transcending geography. By inviting artists to suggest new ways of imagining performances, events, training, discourses and other interventions, a set of new concepts, ideas and approaches are emerging. SPAARKK 2020 has managed to build an online community of both artists, participants and audiences. And today I'm really honored and pleased to present Sound Sessions. Sound Sessions is a deep dive journey into electronic music. This is a series of live online desk concerts and artist speak sessions featuring some of the most knowledgeable independent electronic music producers in India. Tonight is the first in a three-part series featuring Varun Desai, also known as 5VOLTS, and subsequently Aditya Nadwana and Shantam Khanna in the next two sessions. 5VOLTS is a unique merger of technology and music, a one-man live act who works with improvised analog synth work to create electronic music. With a 15-year career as a promoter, label manager, producer, designer and video artist, Varun Desai's culture work has taken him from Burning Man to Berghain, and as the DJ to tour Poland, Switzerland, Portugal, Nepal and India. Varun is also the founder of Synth Farm, a music synthesizer residency that takes place outside Kolkata every year, where he also teaches first-time builders and attendees how to solder and build their own synths. We are going to begin with a desk concert by Varun, who is improvising with his equipment to create this ambient techno set. We are also going to speak to him later on about his musical influences, his artistry and his vision for his sound. So if you have any questions for Varun, make sure to ask them in the comment sections below. Just a quick intro about what is Berghain. Berghain is a nightclub in Berlin, Germany. It is named after that particular location near the border between Kreuzberg and Friedrichshain in Berlin, and is a short walk from Berlin Ostbahnhof. And Burning Man is a Black Rock City event theme explores the quantum kaleidoscope of possibility, the infinite realities of multiverse, and our own superpositioning as actors and observers in the cosmic cacophony of resonance strings. It is an invitation to ponder the real, the surreal, and the metaphysical, a chance to encounter our alternative selves who may have followed or are following or will follow different decisions. So anyhow, without much, looking forward to your concert. That was Varun Desai, also known as 5VOLTS, giving us a magic world of sounds and structures, taking us on a journey. And it is interesting also to know that he is influenced by serialism, which has influenced some of the great composers in history: Schoenberg, Stockhausen, Benjamin Britten, Pierre Boulez, Auropoort, and Ligeti, Stravinsky, and Shostakovich, to name a few. So I'm going to talk to Varun Desai in a minute. So if you have any questions, do join us, and you can ask your question to Varun Desai. Now, Varun, that was world of sound. You created such a beautiful sonic world. Now, I wanted to ask you what brought you to this genre of music, and could you explain your process of making music creation? Could you also introduce the equipment in your set, please? Also, I would just throw in few questions together. How do you choose your sounds and decide on the structure?
In the 1980s all the way to present day, but there's a lot of circuitry that was invented in the 1980s. And this circuitry was intended for different things. Some were accompaniments, some were synthesizers to create music. So my approach is to use these instruments to create two genres that have been brought together in the past, but I'm trying to bring them together in a unique way. And these two genres are ambient music and techno.
Fabulous. And could you also explain what is a little bit about ambient techno as well as this serialism, which seems to be influencing your music basic making process quite a bit?
Well, serialism is something that has influenced my performance in the way that serialism uh, links to sequencing, which is the way that these instruments are programmed. So synthesizers can be sequenced or they can be played by hand. I build my work on a heavy base of sequencing, and serialism has directly affected that. And I would say that as a movement, it has also led to both of these genres, which is ambient and techno. So I kind of trace it back to these roots of playing music in a certain way.
Fabulous. So, if you would be kind enough to explain to our audiences who have joined from across the globe, to explain the music, instruments, and the process, and I leave it to you to how you want to structure that. And maybe at the end of it, maybe we will have further questions, maybe from me, from other participants as well. Over to you, Varun.
Thank you so much. So there's a lot of ground to cover when it comes to the music that I'm performing. But I'd like to talk a little bit about ambient and techno music and its origins, its possible origins, because I find the story quite amazing. And when you do dig into the history of anything, you tend to find a lot of influences that set you on a certain path rather than only listening to what the music has created after it's been made. So going back in time, um, the first instance of something resembling ambient music was furniture music, which was a term coined by Eric Satie in the early 20th century, I think 1970. And furniture music was music that he'd written. They were small pieces of music that were intended to be played over and over again. And that whole process is quite interesting because decades later, half a century later, you have this music that emerges that's completely based on technology. And technology forces you to use things like loops uh, at the time in a hardware format. And a sequencer essentially does that. It loops back information, and you send that information to a synthesizer, a voice, and it plays that. So there's no real development of the pattern. It's the same pattern played over and over. When you look back at the origins of music, I think that was one point of time where both of these quite disparate things started merging. When it came to the definition of furniture music, it was meant to be this music that was played in a space, kind of as background music for people to go about their their day. So lie around the room like furniture, and that defined a certain type of music through the 1920s into the 1930s. In the 1930s, we had this company called Muzak, which was later became a way to describe a certain type of music. Essentially, it was a company that used to create background scores for public experiences like shopping and fairs and things like this. So it was very different from, say, music made for the radio, and both didn't really combine in a lot of ways. However, some orchestral composers who used to compose for both used to also make records and music. So through the 30s and 40s, it kind of was in this domain because there was a lot of acoustic instruments being used. But with electronic instruments appearing in the 1960s, you saw something very different emerge. You saw the possibility of creating sounds that did not belong to a realm of music that could be heard. There was a gigantic leap in what we now call sound design, and that was used to create some of the early electronic music. Uh, One can hear a record called Silver Apples on the Moon by Morton Subotnick and understand how otherworldly the music had really become. That record didn't get famous and cult like till much later, but given that it was made at that certain point of time on a very specific synthesizer called the Bukla, kind of showed that the 60s brought about a very different type of music that could still be played in the background. But with synthesizers, what this music also said was like, okay, it's time for you to maybe pay attention to this background music and listen to what's going on. And it took a long time for it to really solidify into a genre, you could call it. And that happened when a composer called Brian Eno coined this word ambient music, which got picked up by the music industry and record executives because they were always looking for ways of filing this music. And Muzak isn't really, since it was a company, it's not really a genre. And there will be people who say there's a definite big difference between Muzak and ambient music. And if you hear it, there is. But I refer to kind of the setting. So ambient music took place of this music that you could play in spaces, non-obtrusive music that you could play. And as businesses changed, you had things like spas come around and malls and things like that. So, there was a lot of music that went under the radar in terms of ambient music. And then you had these same instruments, these electronic instruments, being used in a city like Detroit to make dance music. And this kind of dance music was extremely rebellious. It was rebellious against the mainstream. It was rebellious. It had an economic angle to it because it was mainly African Americans in the beginning that made and enjoyed techno because the rest of the US at that time was still in a very disco phase. And as you know, disco is linked to flamboyancy, is linked to nightclubs, linked to things that are expensive. And you see this genre called techno emerge in warehouses. And it's quite interesting to see these instruments being used for these things. And somewhere in the middle, ambient music, this background music, and techno music met each other. And I think it met each other in the imagination of people because it didn't sound like anything from this earth when it first started. While disco had a lot of vocals, techno did not. Techno had these synthesizers playing very atonal music that might sound like outer space, and all of these science fiction films that were scored with similar instruments in the 70s and 60s. So in the 80s, you see techno emerge out of Detroit, and because ambient music had performed extremely well in UK in the 80s, you saw artists combine those two, especially in the UK, and you saw a genre called ambient techno emerge from the UK in late 80s and early 90s. So when I look at music that I'm playing, I can trace it back to these two histories. Where I am right now is uh, in a space where I'm constantly exploring old and new technology, trying to combine. I do listen to a lot of ambient music. I've grown as a musician because of listening to ambient music. And because I'm using a drum machine in my set, I can bring in the essence of techno in what I do and also explore things beyond melody, explore the rhythmic side of music, explore 4 by 4 as well as polyrhythmic music and what I do, and try to create uh, an imaginary space using these instruments. Over to
Varun,
you, Jay.
may I? Yeah, yeah. No, Varun, may I ask you? Would you say in your music there is a groove? And if there is it very different from what is referred in, say, hip hop, this kind of urban dance music? And
Yes.
second is, you were once mentioning to me about this Indian contribution, people like Charanjit Singh,
Yes.
and also this very interesting kind of music instrument, and it's named after the person who invented it. The German guy, what is the name?
Leon Theremin.
Theremin, yeah. And I have seen instruments like a hurdy-gurdy, and some instrument. Is it hurdy-gurdy that one which rolls out papers when it rolls? And it's another way of recording music, creating electronically this music. Could you talk a little bit about this groove, about theremins that how when you move your hand, how you change the tone, and also about other ways of mechanization of music production?
I'm glad you noticed all these different things, and it's not very common for a techno or an ambient artist to have a theremin with them. But since I like to talk about the history of music and connect different eras with what I do, it's nice to have a theremin just to create these sounds. It's a very basic electronic instrument that was created invented in uh, the early 1900s, 1920 is actually when you started seeing it, and it was invented by a Russian inventor and engineer who was quite famous for doing um, many different things in the realm of signal processing. And this was one of those things that came out of his brain. And it uses, it's an instrument that you can play without touching. So there are these two sides to it. And I can give a quick demo how it operates. I'd have
Yes.
to switch the camera. Hello. Hi. Can you hear the theremin? Is it audible?
Yes.
Theremin has two parts. You have this antenna out here, and you have a curved antenna on the side. And the antenna on top is what you use to frequency. And this antenna is used. Now, my way of playing the theremin uh, is in no way accurate because I'm waving this hand over length of space. But actual theremin player could play a classical piece on this instrument with enough practice. I can show you the range of notes. So with tiny movements of the hand, you can um, you can play different notes. So with enough practice, you can actually play a piano piece on this. Any piece that's monophonic, which is one note at a time. So with this, I have a drum machine, which linking back to your question, you asked about hip hop. There wouldn't be urban music and hip hop without this drum machine. So this is what it sounds like. And this is the beat that I had towards the end. I can slow it down. Slowed it down to 100 BPM. Add a little. This change in tempo takes it into this groove that is associated with hip hop music. And it has a lot to do with the tonality of this drum machine. So, all you needed in the beginning for hip hop was a drum machine like this, and a microphone, and an MC, and you could do your thing. Or if it was a DJ, then a DJ would have records and play these beats. And along with the drum machine and the theremin, I have a whole array of synthesizers doing all sorts of jobs from creating melodies to creating bass lines. And I have a sequencer, which is something that sends the note information to the synthesizers and tells it what to do. So a lot of the drum sequences I'd programmed in advance and saved on the sequencer, which is something that you can do in the digital era. But I also like to try and sequence on the fly, just because when you're making music that's trying to be authentic to the 80s, the process is very, very important. And a lot of the musicians from that era used to sequence live, and it was very important for them to do that. And that's what connects the musician to with their hands to things like drumming, and sometimes playing the keys as well, playing the keyboards. There is a certain aspect to music when you're not using a synthesizer, where you're playing the key
on a note that is not quantized. That means it's not perfectly on the groove. That gives it a human effect. So I like to mix these two things up as well to create something that's unique yet groovy.
Okay, Varun, one last thing from me, then maybe I will hand over to Alicia, who can probably kind of take questions from the audience. You know, in um, uh, when the Pompidou Center started, and also people like Pierre Boulez was setting up IRCAM, and when Schoenberg started the tonal music, all of that history. And you were also mentioning in your somewhere in about when I read about you saying in the synth lab, I think you help them to create patches. And in IRCAM, for example, in the Max MSP program and all that, they were also there were ready-made patches. Unfortunately, apparently Max MSP and that whole research was bought by military, I heard, because of its interactivity. So, could you tell us a little bit about the patch making and the ideas of this electronic music making or electroacoustic music making? How does that influence, or how can that play a role in the desktop kind of performance?
Okay, that's a great question actually, because it links to something that I'm very, very passionate about, which is modular synthesizers. And I can pull out one just to show you really quickly. This on my lap is a modular synthesizer. And this is where technology again comes in. When these instruments first appeared in uh, in back in the 50s, you could say you had things in music labs that looked like modular synthesizers. It came out of scientific study of sound. And from this space, built these objects that we still use today in technology. And my background as a computer engineer, ironically, merges with my current role as an electronic musician in the space. Because when you look at the history of computers and computing, things were done in a modular format. You had certain, even now, when you look at a desktop and you're building something, and you take out all of these components from your computer, that is a design process which is modular, where you can move things. And this synthesizer functions in the same way. Each one of these blocks is a module, and you can interchange them. They all do different things. So in this case, this is a sequencer, and this is an oscillator. This is uh, a function generator, and this is a voltage controlled amplifier. And when you bring all of these components together, you can create in many, many ways. So when we talk about patching, patching is the process of connecting one thing to the other to create a final output. So if you plug this in, it won't make any sound. You have to connect these points. And this is something that we teach at SynthFarm, the process of connecting these modular concepts to create things that, to create anything, really, create ideas. And there's also another branch of this kind of process for video, where they take video and turn it into this modular system. So what we do at SynthFarm is teach people modular synthesis, but I also uh, work with Aditya Nandwana, who will be joining us next Saturday to present his work. And he is an amazing designer of electronics. He has been manufacturing pedals for many, many, many years. And we worked together on taking a very simple design for creating sound from a chip, from an integrated circuit, which is an analog chip, and teaching people how to use a soldering iron to build their own tiny synthesizer. And
Yeah.
this is something I'm very passionate about, because a lot of people, when their fear is broken, it seems very intimidating to pick up something like a soldering iron. Once you do it once and you create something yourself, this wall comes down, which is the fear of tinkering with electronics, which is another passion. So you have something that you've soldered on your own, and you slowly start understanding design, synthesis, and a lot of the people who come to Synth Farm and build this have moved on to building things that are 10 times the size, or create sounds that they're inspired by, or they imagine and they create these sounds.
Wow,
So
great philosophy. Actually, DY, that's a
yes,
great.
DIY. The DIY.
Yeah, DIY. Yeah, correct. So now I will pass on to Alicia. She might have some questions from the audience or maybe herself. So over to you, Alicia.
Hi, Varun. First of all, great set. Thank you for that. Like Jay was saying in the beginning, I think you really created like a sonic world. As you're listening, there's visual imagery forming in your mind, and that makes for such an amazing like listening experience. Um, I have a couple of questions from the audience that reached out to us earlier. One of them is ties into what you were just talking about at Synth Farm and what you do to initiate beginners and kind of remove that overwhelming fear that might be there with working with electronics. So we have a question from Surbi Mittal, who's asking about where does a beginner start with synths? How do you initiate yourself into the process? Where do you start? And not just in terms of the equipment, but also in terms of the mindset and the approach that you need to have to kind of take that forward. Is that something you could guide us with?
Absolutely. Synthesizers are a very special thing. To a lot of people, they seem like uh, toys, because you enjoy yourself while playing with them and you're imagining things while using them. So it does have this very innocent, childlike aspect of play associated with something that inside is highly complex and technical. So I love how those two things come together. So if you really want to form a passion for synthesizers, one way to do it is to conquer your fear of what really goes into it. But the other way to actually be very passionate about it is play one. And I encourage everyone to try and just find a friend who has a synthesizer and uh, just spend some time on it. Spend half an hour making sounds. It's something that anyone can do. I must mention that when I talk about the synthesizer, I'm not talking about something like Casio or Yamaha modern keyboard that just has presets and keys. I'm talking about a synthesizer where you can sculpt the sound that you play with the keys. And that's the key part of things. It's not playing the keyboard. It is creating the sound that the keyboard will then generate. And I think uh, most of the work is done before you even start playing the keys. But the process of creating that sound and maybe pressing a key as a tuning process is what synthesis is really about. And some of the greatest synthesists, people who created synth voices, are unknown because they used to tour with musicians who played synthesizers. And maybe we don't know some great synthesists because they were just on stage programming some famous keyboardist synthesizer. But that is the essence of it, sculpting and the creation of sound. So I would say to anyone who's interested, start with that. And from there, I think the passion itself will drive you and you'll figure out how far you want to go, whether you want to be a keyboardist, whether you want to design patches, or whether you really want to build your own synthesizer for the first time. If you want to do that, you can do it yourself. There are great resources on the internet. But if you need a helping hand, we come together as a community at SynthFarm. It's a group process. Everyone helps each other. There's this sense of community around the table while we solder, try to bring these babies to life, form this very sweet connection with the electronic.
All right, thank you. I mean, it's interesting that the first thing you mentioned was about playing with it. That's where kind of the passion is born, and then you keep that relationship with playing with the sound is kind of what will keep it going throughout. I think so. You were talking about how you can take this forward, whether you want to go into being a keyboardist. That actually ties into the next question we have from. Let me get the name right, Rijul Victor, who wants to ask a little bit more about like the actual ecosystem of alternative music in India, the future of it, and its role in providing financial stability versus kind of just being a labor of love and something you play with and do for your own kind of soul satisfaction. Particularly in today's context, given that COVID has kind of affected the industry so much. So your kind of insight into the ecosystem in India.
So Rijul is a fantastic electronic musician. To answer his question, where we are currently is a space where the work we do can be heard by everyone. The limitations of music in the past was how to get your music heard, and this certain path that everyone had to follow, which is trying to get a record deal. Uh, right now, as a musician, you have so many paths that you could take, especially if you're making ambient and electronic music. We're not talking about someone who's making music that is going to get played on commercial radio. But no matter what music you make nowadays, there's an opportunity somewhere to get played on some radio. And I find that a very amazing thing about the era that we're in, that you can get broadcasted, you can get published. It's not very hard to achieve these things. So I think the decision has been given to a lot of people. The tools are all out there. You can be any kind of musician that you want to be. You can imagine it and be that person. So if you want to be a recluse and make electronic ambient music that only 10 people are going to listen to, I think that choice is yours. Having said that, it is still very difficult because of all these tools, you have many more musicians right now. So getting your voice heard is really difficult in this huge mass of people on the internet trying to. So coming to that part of the question that talks about being Indian, I think being Indian is a great advantage to us. We should look at it as an advantage because we have the opportunity to pull from a tradition of music in our own country. I wouldn't say we necessarily have to make music that sounds like Hindustani classical or Carnatic music, but there's a lot of amazing knowledge that can be extracted from these sources. And one of the names that I didn't mention when I was talking about influences is Charanjit Singh, who was a musician who was caught between two worlds, playing Bollywood music scores for playing the keyboard and other instruments for Bollywood composers, while he sat in his house making pioneering his music in the 80s by releasing 10 ragas on a disco beat. But the thing about this is, even when you look at someone like Charanjit Singh historically, his music wasn't discovered until it was kind of too late. However, I feel that right now, if you are creating something that truly is pioneering, the chances of you being discovered are high. chances of creating something pioneering are low, but the chances of being discovered are high. So we live in this thing that's constantly changing. And as an electronic musician, the goal is trying to find the balance where we are, what is working in this current context, and how to maybe break these walls that have come up right now. We're not breaking ground as a musician, not so. I think the future is very bright. I think the future is bright if you're exploring things. I think the future is bright if we try to bring as many influences together, because that's the easiest way of creating something. Bring a lot of disparate things together.
Varun, may I ask
Yes.
you one technical question?
Yes.
The way this music, at least the one we heard today, is built on from almost in the minimalistic kind of tradition, built on sound after sound and maybe changing slightly. So I was wondering, something like in our Tala system or the syncopated rhythms of African music,
Yes.
can you think of a way whether these elements, because if, for example, if the pulse is going on, and if you can create a particular rhythmic structure within that pulse, wouldn't that be quite amazing for these electronically created music? Is there any way one could register those things in the and incorporate those kind of things into this kind of music making process?
Absolutely. And this type of music making process lends itself immediately to doing these things. It's just that it's not so obvious because you're doing it on these instruments that don't look like a tabla. But you can take a lot of that knowledge. Uh, Technically, you could take a sequence and have it repeat. You could overlay sequences of different intervals on top of each other and have things evolve. And we're going to hear that more in work when we talk to Shantam Khanna in 2 weeks, who is going to be doing a performance based on generative music, which is exactly what we're talking about, taking uh, a body of knowledge in terms of data and using that data to create these rhythmic overlaps. So there's definitely a lot that we can draw from our tradition and integrate it into that. But we shouldn't be limited by that. We could take the traditions of Indian tals, we could mix it up with Arabic and Japanese traditional knowledge and come up with something unique. And to me, that is something important. It's great if you stick with one tradition, but then you really have to get uh, good at it. Um, I find it's like collaging, the collaging of different theories and cultures. You become, it's a different type of art form. And for me, this kind of expression is also a way of breaking through these walls that we're constantly dealing with as artists, and the sounds that we're constantly asking to conform. I think the possibilities are kind of endless.
Great. Thank you so much, Varun. Varun, is there any other point you wish to mention before we conclude this session? It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would urge everyone to tune in over the next 2 weeks, every Saturday at 7 o'clock, while we talk to two other musicians. We talk to Aditya Nandwana next week, and we talk to Shantam Khanna the week after. And we're going to be talking about different sides of music which I have not explored, but still linked to electronic music. So please tune into that, and we'd love to hear more questions from the audience, linking to the kind of music that we're doing, but also talking on a technical front. They're happy to answer things as highly technical. And
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the Athakalari Institute for movement, uh, for initiating this. It's not very often that dance and music come together in this kind of format. So it's very exciting to bring this to the world through. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Varun, for such an illuminating and insightful performance as well as conversation. It was fabulous to have you. And to kickstart this engagement with the sonic world, the, the, the music and the composition. And like Varun has been mentioning, we have Aditya Nandwana the next Saturday and followed by Santam Khanna the following Saturday. And I would urge all of you, whether practicing theater, dance, music, literature, or film, whichever genre of work you are doing, please do join in this conversation. It's been fantastic. And the spark continues, sparking off new ideas, new initiatives, and bringing even nascent ideas to generate more interesting processes, interesting outputs, and interesting prototypes. So with that, I am signing off. Thank you, Varun, once more, and good night, everybody. See you next Saturday. Thank you.